Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are joined by the lovely Victoria Pelletier. She is a 20-plus year corporate executive and board director and is currently a managing director at Accenture. Nicknamed the turnaround queen by former colleagues and employers, Victoria inspires and empowers her team and clients to change mindsets and drive growth in business, leadership, and culture. As someone who does not subscribe to the status quo, she is always ready for new challenges, becoming one of the youngest chief operating officers at the age of 24. Oh my God, a president by 35 and a CEO by age 41. As a prolific motivational and inspirational speaker, Victoria has delivered keynotes discussing the importance of personal branding and its impact on professional growth, being an empathetic leader in empowering employees, the power of DEI, which for those of you who don't know, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, on corporate cultures and building a life of resilience. If that wasn't enough, she's also contributed a piece to the 2019 book, Unstoppable: Stories of Changemakers Who Dare to Make a Difference. My goodness, Victoria, thank you so much for making the time to be with us here today.
Thanks for having me. And I apologize for the horrendous mouthful that was to get through the bio.
No, that is fine. You've done a lot and achieved so much. You should be recognized for it. So that's why
For sure.
I like to read all of that, because you deserve to get your props.
All the kudos.
Yes.
So tell us your story, because from what I understand, you had kind of an adverse childhood, and yet you rose to do everything that Raquel just talked about. What was your story like?
Well, I will tell you, 10 or more years ago, I wouldn't have been so open. That was a sort of monumental moment and shift for me in terms of my leadership and the speaking I did. And now I share it very broadly, because I do think that understanding people's why, and this was long before Simon Sinek went viral, with
Simon.
I love him. But I think it's really important to understanding, again, our drive, our motivation, our whole selves. And so for me, you do need to understand the A-type personality that's been driven, that started working at 11 and accomplished a lot, is because of my youth. And so I am born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me, in and out of care. I am one of the fortunate ones, however, who was adopted. And so I was taken out of that environment and adopted into, a loving family with certainly no abuse going forward. But that, coupled with I'll say my parents, as I said, loving, but lower socioeconomic status. My dad, a janitor, my mom, a secretary. My mom at some point said, Tori, you got to do better than us. And she meant education and socioeconomically. But it was the biology I was born into and the circumstances I was raised within that caused me to drive forward and have this really relentless, unstoppable mantra and philosophy of how I've chosen to live my life. And I think I'm very big on, I say no excuses drives my children nuts, but I believe we have choice, and obstacles and crap's going to happen. And we have a choice in terms of how we choose to respond to that. And so that is my why, in terms of what's driven me to be, try to be a success in business, but much more broadly, the legacy and the impact I want to have in terms of sharing my story and helping support others.
I want to know, how did it come to be that all of these things that happened as you were growing up, or, in your very early childhood, some would argue your formative years, that you were able to get beyond that and become as successful as you are? Because I think we all know that it can so easily go the other way.
Well, so I started working at a very young age. At age 11, I was working in a hair salon. By 14, I was the assistant manager of the shoe store that I worked at, and then just progressed from there. What I learned in a work environment was I had much greater control than what I'd experienced previously. And by that, I mean my ability to learn the skills to be successful in an environment, my work ethic, and ultimately how I did perform well. The combination of having skill, of understanding success and delivering against it meant I achieved success in the way in which I was measured or they defined it. I learned quickly I had, again, control over that environment where I didn't, in the personal life. I made poor choices in terms of the relationships I held. I think I associated sex with love, and and sadly I was raped in my teens because I put myself in poor situations. Yet that was one place where I knew where I could show up and shine. And so it was the combination of my ability to learn the skills, requisite skills that were important for the role in the company I was working at, with an exceptionally strong work ethic that allowed me to progress really quickly. And so you mentioned I became chief operating officer at 24, and I was a mother, and it was a massive stretch role for me. It came because I had been working for a bank while I was in university, and I took all the courses I could. I was running large scale contact center operations, but I went from doing outbound telemarketing insurance sales on credit cards for only 6 months before I got promoted. But from there to the retail banking side, to lending, to I got my securities course. And so all of a sudden I could lead the contact center that did, investment banking. When I got approached to be the COO of an outsourcing organization, it was contact centers, banking clients on a multitude of those fronts. I had a tick in the box for many of those areas. I hadn't run sales. I hadn't run marketing. I hadn't run HR or technology. I had to lean into those and hire great people who could do it. But it was because I'd learned skill, because I had a strong work ethic. And I certainly was in a space that was in demand that allowed me to step into that role. And then from there, I had to get really comfortable with, I said, leaning on teams, saying, hey, I don't know what I don't know, and finding people who did. And then a multitude of other things from, personal branding and, my leadership style and building a strong culture within the organizations would be other things.
I want to say you briefly said that you were raped, and I want to acknowledge that and say I'm sorry that that happened to you. And although you might have put yourself in bad situations, that still never gives anyone the right. You did not deserve that.
Exactly.
And then
that was not your fault.
And then the other thing I want to say is that I think it's really amazing the vulnerability that you have decided, you said, in the last 10 years to show. And I have read quite a few of the things that you wrote, and you said that that vulnerability has really changed your leadership style. How has that played out for you?
It has, absolutely. I think I showed up in the workplace with a mask on initially, in part because I was the only woman. I was in that first executive role. I was the youngest by at least 2 decades. I also happened to be a member of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman prior to being married to my husband. So I was the only on a bunch of different fronts at that point. And so I felt like I had to show up in a certain way. And so there was zero vulnerability by choice ever shown. All business, all the time. I came with an agenda into the meeting. We have deliverables to our clients, like, let's move forward. And I've also been through 18 mergers and acquisitions within my career directly for the companies I've worked for, many others for clients I've supported. And in running the operations generally of businesses, that's where the majority of employees sit. And so there's always expectations for synergy, cost takeout, and therefore reorg. I got a nickname in my mid to late 20s of the Iron Maiden. Came from the fact that I showed up in a way I was referred to being very much like one of the guys, and some meant that as a compliment, but then double-handed as well. And it was several years, no, not even years, probably months after that, and learning about that nickname. Came in on a Monday morning and joking with a colleague about our weekends. And I said, I'd been in whatever, I don't know what movie it was, but that I was bawling and I didn't have enough of those tiny little popcorn Kleenexes to like wipe away the tears. And she joked and she's like, oh my gosh, Vic. She goes, I thought you'd be the type of person who'd laugh at people at credit movies.
Oh,
that crushed me. Iron Maiden, I was kind of like, oh, that's unfortunate. But then hearing that, and that's when I realized that is not who I am. My best friend has nicknamed me Turtle. I have a tattooed on my arm. She's got the matching one, but that's my nickname she gave me. Tough exterior, exceptionally resilient, but I'm really all soft and mushy on the inside. So that was the moment for me where I said, I am the type of leader I would not want to work for. People probably fear me, but they wouldn't follow me into a proverbial fire. I'm
Right.
going to have to do things differently. And so I needed to stare at myself in the mirror and say, like, critically at that woman and say, what do I need to do differently? And a big part of that was around being vulnerable, showing some emotion so that people understood that there's a really human-centered leader that sat behind some of the really tough business decisions I had to make.
Mm.
And so that meant I needed to show emotion. I also needed to start leading in a different way. And it was a time where I started doing way more mentorship than I had previously. And I also couldn't mentor others and talk about career journey if I didn't tell them my backstory and what drove me there. And
Right.
that's when I started to see like such tremendous gains within the relationships I had at work and the people who wanted to follow me as I started, when I made a job change, for example, and left my company. So that was a shift for me. And now I'm all in all the time. And so when I talk about personal branding, when I talk about leadership and how we engage, I always will come back to this, authentic sharing of ourselves to the extent that we're comfortable. Not everyone's prepared to be as open and vulnerable as I am, but taking steps towards that, because I mean, it brings such great reward, relationship, and more.
So we often talk about the ideal workplace being where someone can, as they take that step into the door, showing up as their authentic selves. Raquel and I have often said that's almost impossible in most work
Absolutely.
situations.
Absolutely.
You create a culture where that's not only impossible, but that's the expectation, is that we get to come to work as who we are.
Yeah. And I do think it's tough. And when you're first navigating your way into a new organization, you need to kind of suss all those things out before you feel comfortable doing it. But what I would say is authenticity is, also a deep connection to your values and integrity. That shouldn't change from day one. Again, how open you might be around sharing your lived experience and other stories will change and evolve as you garner more comfort and recognize that whether it's a culture of inclusivity and a sense of belonging or not. But I still think there's elements of that authenticity and vulnerable self connected again to things like your personal values and integrity that should be there from day one, and you should never question. And if you do, then it's the wrong place.
I think I have a two-part question. How do you still, as a manager, as a leader of people, how do you get them to see that you are being authentic and that you also are making it a safe space for them to do the same? And then second part of this question, how do you teach other managers or leaders of people, or however you want to term it, how do you teach them to do that?
My brand is very much known around a number of things. And so I talk a lot about brand, but it's just, I mean, I just think it's so critically important. And a lot of people think it's your job title in the organization you work for. And maybe if you've spent a lot of time in one industry or function, it's more than that. My brand, I am known for a number of things. And so being incredibly authentic, showing up with radical candor, for Kim Scott, to borrow her phrase and from her book title, but doing that from a place of care and compassion. So I'm just quite simply known for that, amongst others. And that's because I show up consistently that way. My online presence translates when you meet me. So a lot of people have done their homework when they, come to a job interview, sometimes too much, it's a bit scary. But when they meet me in person, like, I'm the same Victoria. It's not all filtered out, for this grade. So that's one. But then consistently, as part of one, but the thread into two is into how to teach others to do it. It's about marrying your actions with it, not just do as I say, not as I do. It is do as I do. And I'm going to show you how I do that. And it might not be comfortable for you, but I'm going to create a safe place because I'm going to be vulnerable. And I'm going to encourage other people who I know can be vulnerable to do that in an environment where you see that this isn't just appreciated. This is very much welcomed. And we're all going to do that. And then if there's people who are showing up in a way that's not, as I said earlier, not everyone needs to be that vulnerable, but I ask for authenticity from everyone. if I see them showing up in a way that's not creating that, I'll happily have the one-on-one conversation with them as well, whether it's to reinforce again and that it's a safe place, whether it's to share how I had to grow out of not being that authentic, vulnerable person to where I am today, to help them on their journey.
And I'm sure many people who are listening right now, I honestly don't know if I could list maybe even one or two bosses that I've had in jobs that have been significant. This is where, this is paying my bills and this is where I get my insurance kind of thing. This is where I spend the bulk of my time. I honestly don't know if I can name a boss that I have had where I felt that comfortable, or where I felt that maybe one, where I felt that boss was showing up authentically as who they were, and also was being the same with staff as opposed to maybe the higher ups. I just have to say, for those of us who've been on the wrong side of this, thank you for doing that, because I don't even know if I would know how to react at this point. I mean, I'm 53. I've been working a long time. I don't know if I would know how to react in a situation like that. I think I would be thoroughly stunned.
Well, Raquel, Victoria, maybe you weigh in on this. I think that, having also been in many leadership positions and agreeing with the type of direction that Victoria is going, I think that there is like this big drive for women initially to show up kind of in their masculine at a job or in a leadership position. And it takes courage, and it takes showing up in the feminine as well, in a balance, actually, not all feminine, but like a balance of the masculine and the feminine. And I don't think it's a prevalent leadership style.
It really is not.
I think leaders like Victoria are coming out and showing that there is a new way to run an organization. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Victoria, do you see it at lots of places?
Sadly, no. And this is where I think that does need to be a new way of leading.
Agreed.
Much more humanity, human-centered way of life. So a lot of people talk about servant leadership. But for me, it's this human-centered way of leading. And what I find is a lot of organizations or leaders think that there needs to be a trade-off between having a high performance culture with one that also is very focused on being human-centered. What they don't realize is, I think, the human-centered leadership drives even higher performance and engagement within their employees.
Yes.
I have made a choice. That is who I am, and that's how I'm going to show up. Even though I worked in organizations that didn't widely have that. My colleagues and senior executives might not have operated in that way. But for my team, you knew if you were going to work in my business unit, this is how you show up. And I'm going to have your back. And because I'm going to demand a certain type of way we engage one another in their business and ethics and integrity across other parts of our organization. And I always believe like our voice is our power. Yes, I'm an executive, but I typically work for large global organizations. I might have even had C-suite titles, but there's often in these large companies, many of those too. I'm going to be a party of one if I need to be, but hopefully that'll go to 2, it'll go to 3, it'll go to 10 leaders.
When you do your public speaking, your workshops, are you training leaders on these techniques?
The majority of the time I'm brought in to be a speaker for 1 hour. And usually they might ask me to stay around for Q&A or a breakout session or something after. So there's a limited amount of time for me in 60 or 90 minutes or even a subsequent breakout session to do a lot of teaching. I hope there's a significant amount of motivation or inspiration because I got it wrong, and I'm prepared to tell them I got it wrong and I learned from it and the benefits I've gained since doing it. I always try and leave them with actionable insight or advice that they can take away immediately into their personal or professional lives.
If you ever get to the point where you just create like a book or a manual or a how-to of any sort, please let me know. I have several people I could send it to. Anonymously, sure, but there's a lot of people who can learn from all of what you're talking about.
Well, I think one of the main problems, if you had a boss like Victoria, it would knowing that that's authentic would even be hard in some cases because people are so used to, like, HR. Does HR really have the team members back, or do they have the company's back? And yes, it's supposed to be a balance, but we all know at the end of the day kind of who wins that one, right?
Oh yeah.
I have a more personal question, if we can kind of change the subject a little bit. You talk a lot about resiliency in your writing. And my mom had this saying growing up that I just despised. She would say, don't worry, children are resilient. They're resilient. Don't worry." And so for me, the word resilient, it didn't resonate with me. It was always like, resilience means, yes, we can put our kids through these terrible things, but they'll survive, right?
Yeah.
How does resilience play out for you? Because I know it's part of your leadership and part of probably how you raise your family. How do you see resilience?
Yeah, no, it's much more than what your mother said or taught you, in my opinion. You can be resilient, which is, the ability to withstand a significant amount of challenge or pressure over and over again. But there's a healthy level of resilience. And this is actually,
Healthy being the key.
absolutely. So the ability to, have the tough exterior all the time and put up walls and barriers so those people can't come and hurt you, it's not healthy. You can be exceptionally resilient, but you're going to miss out on a lot of life and relationships if you choose to operate in that way. So for me, it's a multi, sort of stage process to being resilient. Always, I anchor on a goal or objective that I've set for myself. And in my childhood, I might not have said, hey, I need to be X title so CEO by 41. But that wasn't there, right? Actually, I wanted to be a lawyer when I was a kid.
God bless you. Don't do it.
Raquel also.
I went to law school.
Yeah. No, I thought what I thought was going to be a year off while I went to go and work in this bank, and I'd gotten promoted. And then before I go to law school, never happened. I love the business world. So I stayed there. But so back then I wouldn't have said it was, didn't have the healthy level of resilience. Now for me, it's around anchoring around a goal or objective that I've set for myself. And it can be anything personally or professionally. So actually my current personal one is I had a really horrific accident this summer and I've put on 15 pounds. I was in a wheelchair for a while. So I see it in my face, sadly, when I'm like sitting here talking to you guys. And so
You look gorgeous.
Yeah, you look beautiful.
Thank you. But, so that's a goal that I have for myself now that I'm able to get back and start doing much more of the work, the type of workouts. I didn't actually start working out much, but that I was before. So for me, that's the goal and objective I have. And then progress towards it. So, each pound I get, so I want people to think even in that way. But for me, I set a goal for myself as it relates to the public speaking I was going to do this year in 2022. My husband, at one point, I was doing a bunch of stuff I wouldn't normally say yes to. And he's like, why? I said, because I have a goal and I'm going to achieve it. And I did. So goal.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Or objective that we anchor onto, whatever that is. So that's one. Two is give yourself permission to fail, however, because challenges are going to come along. Shit you can't control. We have a choice in terms of how we're going to respond. I'm not saying don't be emotional. I mean, I'm very quick to the emotion I have when a challenge comes in front of me, whether it's anger, it's sadness, whatever, have it. And then I build a plan towards how I'm going to, move forwards towards that goal. The next would be I'm incredibly reflective. The one thing my adoptive mother did, she is my mom, not my biological mother, is she'd sit me down and she's like, Tori, we need to dig deep into why are you feeling this way? Why are you doing the things you're doing? And I hated it as a teenager. But that actually allows me now to sit down. I've left one company at one point and went to another one, and I didn't like either. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm the common denominator here. So let me sit down and figure out, what is it about Victoria? What am I not enjoying about this? And there was elements of things that was out of my control in culture and leaders, but also certain things for me. And so then I built a plan, and some of that was around modeling the thought, action, and behavior that I wanted to be or become that aligned towards my personal goal or objective. And then that's just, you continue to go around that cycle, go back to the next goal or objective. For me, that's what being resilient in a very healthy and positive way looks like.
Much better definition than my mom's.
It sounds like you are very open to alternative ways of doing business, right? Like you're not just modeling what's already there. For instance, there's one of the pieces that you wrote on LinkedIn where you talk about leaders can't be know-it-alls. You need to look to other sources of information. Right now, you're talking about, being reflective and going inside for looking at what your part in the leadership model is. There's also the part of where your direct reports come in, where your team comes in, and how they relate, and how you can learn from them, because you don't know it all, or you shouldn't be a know-it-all. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you can use alternative methods to be a good manager or a good leader?
We could be here for hours.
Sure, just a short answer, just a quick question.
So you're right. I do talk about, and I embrace I don't know what I don't know, and seeking out to learn, improve myself and educate myself, but also really just surrounding myself with great people who have knowledge and experience that I don't. It's a big part of my advocacy around broad diversity, equity, inclusion. Like those diverse workplaces and communities are so rich because of all the puzzle pieces that come together if we allow them to. I try and figure out what is needed in a particular situation, whether it's for a client engagement that we're working on or just broadly within our organization, and find the missing puzzle pieces, and be open to hear around how maybe it's not a perfect fit, but they've got all these other elements and I don't have it. So maybe we're going to learn. And so that would be one, but the other is this way of looking at the workforce much more around skills. So I talked about skills being one of the things that I think I attribute to my success in trying to learn new skills, but also making sure they're relevant. Are you familiar with it, like Japanese ikigai philosophy around like doing work that
a little bit?
Yeah, it's around basically like doing work that you not only know and you're good at, you can get paid for, but it's also around things like relevancy. There's a few other circles, but on it, there's a great visual, but I mean, those are the key ones. And so it's also thinking about skills. We tend to get very hyper, like almost myopically focused on job titles and direct working experience. You've held this exact role in this function in this competitive company to bring them in. And it's looking very differently at that now, because so much of the skills in this digital transformation, and every company's a technology company, whether they build, technology services, right? So looking at those skills very differently and what's going to be needed for the organization today, but also connecting that directly back to business strategy. So where are we going? What products, what services, how are we going to go to market? And tying that back to skills, where can we find them? Or where do we find people with propensity to learn and develop? And the potential, going back to diverse, find people with great potential that might not fit that mold exactly. And as a leader, it's then incumbent upon me to help grow and develop them to bridge anything that's missing.
So yes, growth and development, not just, hey, this is your position, stay in your lane. Oh, imagine that.
Oh, Raquel's a little bitter about her work experience. All right. Do you have all your workforce questions out of the way? Because I want to go back to the personal.
I do. I'm sorry.
Okay. This one's a tough one. I'm going to quote something that you wrote. You said, and I believe this is from the book Unstoppable. You said, I cannot begin to understand the currents that persuade a parent to abuse and give up a child, but I do understand the pain and guilt the abandoned child feels as her life is unraveling. Come and get her before I kill her. That's what your mom said to you. And that's what drives your story. But I have always been even more curious about, how does that feel? What emotion, and how do you embody that emotion?
You on video can probably see, like, hearing it, even as you read it back to me, it brings emotion, brings tears to the forefront. And just, I mean, I stand on stages and I tell the story, and almost every time it brings that emotion to me. So yeah, Julie, she's my biological mother. Those were the last words she said while I remained in her care. So, I mean, although I was 4, I
So
mean,
young.
Yeah,
but
that sticks with you.
well, and it's funny because people will say like, how much, do you remember and how far back? I mean, I like, sadly, kid was 2 years old and, pushed down some stairs. When I was 3, I had a cigarette in my eye and I wear a patch for months. Like these are things I remember. And I think most
Oh,
children don't remember much before probably age 6. So for me, it really is what shaped me, because I think of, how I developed relationships initially. I was always living in fear of being rejected or hurt. I remember my mom saying to me consistently, she's like, because I think I would sort of push them away when if I did something wrong, or the last thing that set Julie off is I taken some cookies without, and I was worried. I lied to her about taking them, but like a 3 or 4-year-old, like you leave crumbs on the right. And so that's what set her off. And so anytime I did something and my mom would be angry with me, I remember, and I would sort of push her away, and she's like, Tori, we are not giving you away. Like, she had to consistently make me feel like I was safe.
What a good mom you had.
Yeah, she is amazing. Unfortunately, she passed away when I was pregnant with my I have 2 kids, my younger one.
So sorry.
But I carried that with me. So although she was amazing, I still, in my relationships, I push people away. Right.
Yeah.
And so I harbored that for a very long time. And I needed to learn how to have more confidence in myself and realize I deserved to be loved and to start to build trust in others. And it's actually been broken along the way since then. If I never put myself back out there to trust and build new relationships, I was never going to get to the kind of loving relationships that I desperately desire and wanted. And so I've, gone the other way with my kids. I mean, I do not hang up the phone without saying, I love you. Each of them, like my children will know. I mean, my younger one, who's just turned 18, decided to move in with my older son. And so it's great that they want to live together. And, and so I was up there getting them all, settled in. And, my son, the older one, he'll be 23 soon. He's 6'3" and 200 pounds. He looks like a Viking with beard. His hair is just like mine, but big red beard. And I'm like giving him like monster hugs. Like, they are not going to know. They're not going to have any idea what it's like not to be exceptionally loved, and know that regardless of what they do, mom's always here for them.
You're breaking that cycle. You've done the work, and it sounds like you continue to do the work so that you can give the love to your sons and to yourself that you didn't get very early on. Thankfully, you got that from your mom.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge thing that you're doing.
So in like doing all of the work that you did, the self-work, the discovery, you talked about now taking that emotion into the business world and having a hyper awareness that made you successful. Can you explain that hyper awareness? Because I think I have felt that. And in your writing, I started to put it together a little bit. And I think if our audience heard it, maybe for some people, this would be like, oh, that's where that comes from. And it can be annoying, but it can be a super skill.
Yeah, it annoys me sometimes to this day, because it actually contributes to really poor sleep for me. So there's a number of ways I process my day. So at the end of the day, my poor husband has to hear me kind of vent. Although now that I work from home, sometimes at the end of a call, I'm like, fuck's sake, right? And he like, he walks in, he's like, are you okay? Do you need me to get you a tea? Like, do you need to talk about it now? Or if I have time, maybe. But anyway, so just talking through it, sometimes not from a place of wanting any advice or input, it's kind of the verbal diarrhea and get it out. So that'll be one. But the other is I wake up, I'm in my mid-40s, to use the washroom in the middle of the night. And then I come back to bed and the brain starts going. And that's where I start to, think quite a bit around, again, what's happened during the day. How am I connecting back to the goals or objectives I have, the people that I'm engaging with? And I spend a lot of time reflecting on it. So sadly, I'll be up for a couple of hours. That's the annoying part of it. Reflecting through that and trying to go, what do I need to do differently? Or how do I need to engage with this person? If it's a challenge on my team, I need to, clearly they're motivated by something different than potentially I might be, or, they've got goals or objectives that are different than mine. That's when I spend a lot of time. That's that hyper awareness. And I'll bring it back to, what do I need to do differently? Or if it's with team members, again, how can I leverage my background, skills, knowledge, or experience to help bring them forward? And sometimes that's just even for them, deep self-reflection. And in some cases, like, I've got leaders of leaders. And so I need to have some conversations with how they show up for their team, and whatever I can do to, draw some of whatever's holding them back out of them to bring it forward for their own teams.
Sounds like you actually put in the effort to get to know the people on your team and develop those relationships so that you can get to understand their why and help them harness that to be most effective in the workplace.
Definitely. And 100%. And so I think it's critically important within the workplace and the people that I work with, and I am fortunate to lead, but I also take that out externally into how I predominantly been in a business to business environment, in my entire career. So building trusted, it's an abused term when we talk about partners, being their trusted advisor and partner. Well, for me, that means something. When I said I left one company and moved to another, that self-reflection I did was because of the way each of those two companies sold, and they were large publicly traded companies, and the way they were very focused on the short term. That's fine. And that's what the shareholders want. I realized in my personal reflection, that doesn't sit well with how I choose to lead. I'm in it. So you said you like, Simon Sinek, Jennifer. So the infinite game. Yes, I'm in it to win contracts in business for now, but I'd rather invest in a long-term relationship so that I can win. Maybe it's a much larger contract, but ultimately I'm now going to have a client for life. As they move around, they know I truly am their trusted partner. Again, going back to brand, I'm authentic. I'm radically candid with them. And therefore I've built trust. Sometimes how I lead, no, not sometimes, always I lead this way, including externally and not just within the workplace, with the team I'm supporting, with clients, with the community. It's my expectation with how I engage with partners, partners being vendors or, to myself as well. And so that's what you see is what you get. When I said there's no different version of Victoria, then I give serious thought in terms of even my next career step, where I plan to go back from professional services to be a C-suite executive. And I will work for a company that aligns to and sells products or services, and or has that same belief and mission that I do around purpose and building that kind of those relationships and not making the short-sighted trade-offs all the time.
Yeah. You're very clear about your direction. And therefore, I think as a team member, it would be a very simple choice to follow or not follow, because you're not playing a big word game. That what I've experienced, a lot of managers, they talk in circles, and you're like, what do you stand for? Who are you? You're very clear in your direction. And I admire that.
Thank you. Thank you.
The other question that I had for you is around, everybody talks about this work-life balance and that women can have it all. And did you have to, in order to achieve so much in your career, did you find that you could have life balance, or did you find that it came with some sacrifice?
I hate when people ask me the question over, can you have it all? And you can not all at the same time is my response.
Yeah.
And there is sacrifice and there's compromise. And you're going to make them at different times in your life for different reasons. And it's going to be, hopefully it is, the right decision. I mean, I worked 220 days 1 year, which is roughly how many work days there are. I think my daughter, who's now, sorry, I'll say daughter because she was then, she's now transitioning to male, was at the time. So I'd come home on the weekend and I'd hear full sentences that I'd missed out on. And I always traveled excessively. I missed a lot of, I couldn't be at every, hockey game. You'll hear, I'm originally from Canada, so it won't surprise you. So I missed hockey games, or I missed school fairs or whatever. But when it really mattered, I was there. So, I got divorced when my kids were 5 and 9 from my ex-wife. She passed away from cancer a few years later. And we had shared custody of our kids. And I was in another role that had me on the road 15 or 18 business days a month. And I had to make a decision. I loved the job I was in. I'd only been there for about 18 months. I could either move the kids to New York, and it was between Toronto and New York at the time. I could move them there. And not only in addition to losing a parent, they lose all their friends and have to start over in what was a new city for them. Or I try and find a job. I was with American Express at the time. That was back in Toronto. There wasn't any at my level. And so I made a choice and I quit and I went back to a Toronto-based job with around 10% travel. I sacrificed my career at that point then for my children. And that was absolutely the right decision to have made. And so I think you're going to make these choices that you may feel guilt. So I have mom guilt for sure. I've tried not to let others make me feel guilty. So the same day my daughter was born, I gave birth at 7:30 in the morning. My ex had her first round of battle with cancer while I was pregnant with her. So I drove us home because she had chemo that day. So I was home at 5:30 and my daughter was sleeping and I got back online and worked later that night. And people are like, what the heck? And I'm like, well, everyone's sleeping. I'm like, my choice.
Wow. Yeah.
But again, I've made, other choices. When I moved back to that Toronto-based job that had me traveling less than 10% of the time, I picked up where my ex left off and I started being the hockey coach, 15 to 20 hours a week. So I think you're going to make choices and sacrifices at certain points in your career and life, just frankly. And I would encourage you to do what's right, a good balance of what's right for you with all those that are important in your life.
I appreciate you saying that because one of my biggest pet peeves is the whole notion of having it all at the same time. It's an unrealistic standard of perfection for us to try to live up to. So I appreciate you saying that. I also want to acknowledge that I think you are a phenomenal person. I mean, just really phenomenal. Congratulations to your son. You are an amazing person. What a phenomenal mother, manager. If I was going to work for someone, I would work for you. I'm not going to work for anybody again, but if I was going to, I would work for you.
Thank you.
Listening to you talk about being reflective, connecting with your team, doing the work, that gives me hope that other people are going to learn from this.
Yes.
And that other managers will learn from this, or other team members even will learn from this. And will
humans.
Yes, other humans, yes, will
learn
from this. Yes, because what you're talking about in the workplace is what we hope to have in our personal lives, to work with and to be with and exist with people who are reflective, who notice where they have areas and opportunities for growth and change, and set that example for other people. And I would think, and I hope you can talk to this a little bit, I would think that your family and your friends and people who see you personally can see that and can tell that change has happened within you.
For those who've known me for a long time, yes, my best friend is probably the one person who's known me the closest for the longest amount of time, who would have absolutely seen that arc and that change. She and I originally met, actually, I think I had come in to consult at her company. So she got to meet me in a work context where I was leading, and then now knows me as my best friend and has seen me through relationships. And so has seen that whole change. And so they would say that for sure. I've been fortunate to stay connected with many colleagues that I've worked with, for decades ago, who commented on, whether it's the writings or seeing, a lot of the work that I'm doing, or just, it's nice to win awards for stuff, but I'd actually rather hear when someone comes to me and says one-on-one, either talks about how much I've impacted or touched their life or career. That's way more meaningful. And that's actually, at the end of the day, that's why I do what I do. My goal is around the legacy I want to leave, is about the kind of positive impact I could have on all those, that I touch. And I say that because for me, it's not just work, right? That's in my community. That's broadly.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I wanted to steer the conversation a little bit to the DEI work that you do and how that topic goes when you're having the conversations with other teams, other companies, and how that then shows up. with those other companies?
So one of the things that's most passionate to me and where I've spent a ton of time, and so it was for all the reasons I stated myself personally. So although I recognize I have great privilege as, a white woman born in North America, my early years of being in and out of child welfare, the sort of lower socioeconomic position I was in, to being the only woman, the youngest, and queer. That initially it was my personal experience that I wanted to do more for others, so they didn't feel like they were the only. That was one. Two is I quickly realized how phenomenal it was within the workplace. So that first role where I was leading in a outsourcing organization. So it's not generally the destination career for people. It's a stopgap. Doing call center, it's tough work. So people are doing that as a stopgap, or for many of them, they were new immigrants to the country. Creating an environment where I could get higher performance and hopefully keep them just a little bit longer, because turnover there is massive. And so creating an environment where it was inclusive and people felt like they could belong, it literally drove amazing business results. And this is 20 plus years ago, before there were employee or business resource groups. And we were talking more formally about the way we do today. And so I was fortunate to be able to marry at some point the advocacy and the work I was doing within companies to a day job when I started to run HR-led businesses. So HR strategy and consulting, which included DE&I and outsourcing businesses. I use the phrase strategic intentionality in the way we need to think about DE&I. Far too often, leaders are looking at it as a tick in the box.
Yeah.
And it's about the diversity of workforce and usually the slate of candidates that are getting presented to hiring managers. But what they're missing is they're bringing in diverse talent in the front door, but they're leaving out the back as quickly as they've come in.
Yeah.
Because there's not equity, equal opportunity, and a sense of inclusion and belonging within the organization.
Yep.
It's not just about where the talent acquisition team or recruiting team is going to get their candidates. That's certainly a part of it. But it's again, I talked about skill, propensity to learn, potential. Looking at those criteria as we look at what do we need in the business and how do we get them to stay there? How do we build a strong sense of engagement? The propensity for employees to recommend or refer to their friends is one of the best questions to ask an employee engagement survey to really gauge them. So for me, it's shown up as, while I was at IBM, I had the most diverse team across the Americas, if not the world, not only in terms of gender, but all elements of diversity. And that's incredibly, now I was only there for a few years, so I'm not going to take credit for all of that because many people were there for a number of years, but when I certainly looked at all the hiring I did in driving that forward, I took the opportunity. There was, for example, a phenomenal Black man who he was, for me, I knew he's just an amazing human being. And he had all women and they all came to me around his advocacy for women as well. And post George Floyd and all he did he didn't need to be on every single call to talk about his lived experience. I was determined. I said, I'm going to do everything possible to make sure you make partner this year.
Wow.
Crushed me to leave the organization right before he is partner now. But I literally, even though I'd left the organization, I recorded a video in support of his candidacy. I helped put him forward for the slate to be there. But it was people, and I'm not the only one. He earned a lot of that on his own. He's exceptional. As I said, he's not only a great human, great leader, great for his clients. He earned all of that. But for me, that was me intentionally saying, I am going to take, and he'd only been there a couple of years. So again, it's hard when you come into those kind of environments. And so we need to be incredibly intentional about that. We need to help those as we rise, and we need to look beyond people that look like us. Again, there's a multitude of ways to do that, but let's not lay it all on the doorstep of HR and the recruiting team.
Yes.
And not assuming that his credentials will get him there. People do need people to speak up for them. They do.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, they need advocates.
Exactly.
There has to be somebody there who's going to say your name in the rooms that you are not currently in to get you into those rooms.
Well put.
Well, Victoria, I thank you for being that person for, it sounds like lots and lots and lots of people, because they're, like Jennifer said, everybody needs that. For you to defy the odds to come from where you started to where you are now, that's huge. And yes, resilience is a part of that for sure. But I think there's a whole other element to it that we kind of touched on a little bit, but not specifically, is that you are heart-centered. You are wanting to do for your community and for other people. And I think that's a really huge part of it. And I want to make note of that, is that because you also are a good human, you were able to, with your resilience, defy those odds and not be a stereotype and not just be another statistic. Yeah, I don't have enough good, I can't think of all of the good words to say. I think I'm a little speechless at this point, but I'm very,
You're
um,
Raquel's
I'm in,
dream and a leader manager. You're her
yeah,
dream come true.
yes, you are. And I'm thoroughly impressed by you. The vulnerability that you show, not just in your personal life with your friends, but at work, which can be a very difficult thing to do, you do. And I know you talk about resilience a lot in your writing. And my first reaction when I saw the word resilience was, oh no, come on. Because it's the whole, let's see what else we can dump on this person, right? Like, how much more can this person handle, right? Sometimes resilience can be like a double-edged sword. You took the other side of it, turned it into a lovely thing, and have used it to bring people up with you.
I tend to use unstoppable more than I even do resilient.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's on the book. Yes, and hashtag no excuses. Yeah, but putting all that together without the heart and the vulnerability could be very, very, very toxic. I think it's really key that you acknowledge all of the parts in that equation. Thank you for putting all that back into being a manager and being a leader of people.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Is there anything that we haven't asked or that we haven't touched on that you think that we need to?
The other thing I would state that's really important, we sort of touched it a little bit, but is this notion of purpose. And I do think that's critically important for companies and leaders to understand. There is a purpose gap, and that it is in what I think companies believe they've articulated what their purpose is because they might have put a fancy statement on the wall. But is that really connected to those that buy from them? It's not just their employees, but customers. So, I mean, not everyone can do what Patagonia did. I mean, it's great to be a private company and, talk about how you're going to donate all your profits. But so I'm not talking about it just in that way, but ideally you're getting clear on what your purpose is, with the superpowers you choose to keep within the organization and who delivers that for you. But then at the individual level, how do you connect that purpose to the values and mission that people have, again, in the types of companies they would want to work for and with, and the people in the organization? Where I think the leader's job also is getting connected to bringing down that macro level of purpose that sits at the C-suite and board, but to the individual. Each of our work, how do we contribute to that? What is our impact in that? So everyone feels like when they are having an impact and contributing, to that ultimate mission. That's the other thing as well that I think there's lots of talk about now, and more so because the ESG agenda is further out there. But I don't know that many leaders have figured out how to do that well. I think that's critically important going forward. And what's the future? I don't like future of work because the future's here. Something also really important.
Well, let's hope that gets out there and people start talking about it and learning about it.
I could talk about that for days, but that'll be another podcast.
Victoria, thank you so much. You have definitely given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from this and from your story and your way of leading. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was great to meet you both and have a conversation today.
Thank you. You too. I hope that everyone listens to this and gets out of it what we did. And I'm going to put out this call to action for our listeners. Find a way to get Victoria's writing and workshops, all of that, into the hands of people who are in leadership positions. And of course, do it in a way that it will be received well, hopefully. People have so much to learn from her, because one of my pet peeve isn't the right word, but one of the things that I'm always sort of upset about is that people are brought into leadership positions without being taught how to lead and how to manage.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And so they could be so much more effective if they knew these things.
Mhm.
But companies don't generally take the time to put that energy and that investment into those new leaders to help them to be better leaders and to help them to help their employees to become and be and evolve into better employees.
Agreed. But this is also a different paradigm of leadership because
Oh, absolutely.
the ethics, the vulnerability, the authenticity, these are things that we're not always seen as strength,
Right.
but they are true strength in leadership.
Absolutely.
And I really believe, I hate to get too much on the masculine and feminine, but I really believe it is the feminine leadership that leads from the heart-centered, what you were talking about. And in order to be an authentic team member, to walk across that threshold into work, you cannot be truly authentic if your leaders are not truly authentic with you. It's
Yes.
just almost impossible. You cannot build trust with someone who is not trustworthy with you.
Right. You're literally still wearing that
All
mask.
wearing a
I mean,
mask.
yeah. I mean, we've talked about that a number of times. You're wearing a mask at work.
And in your community, maybe even. So maybe even in your family.
Yeah, true. So all of this spreads out. It isn't just applicable to the work world. These are principles and ideas that are applicable throughout in your community, in your family, at your workplace, in your relationships. This is all stuff that's key.
And her being authentic and sharing such a personal story, lots of personal stories. She has, like we all do, she has lots of personal stories, but sharing that makes her the truest and realist and, dare I say, most loving type of leader that there is. And that's the leader. Those are the leaders that will lead us out of what we're currently in. Like I said, I would hardly work for anyone, but I would work for her.
Well, let's hope that there are more leaders to come that are more like Victoria.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. No, I don't believe in all that. She's doing it. She's modeling it. Let's learn and do it.
Yes. Let us pay attention for sure.
Do it. Let's do it. Be unstoppable.
Yes.
Hashtag
no excuses. Yes.
That's right. Bye, Raquel.
Bye, Jennifer. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.